One question, why was I stopped? And Monique Edwards' world shatters. Public defender, cuffed, humiliated. The arrest, unjust. The charge, resisting. The footage captured on her phone goes viral. Her husband, a rising politician, now faces the unthinkable. Protect his career or stand with his wife. This is more than a marriage. It's a reckoning. Will her courage crack the system? Or will she be erased like so many before her? It was just past midnight. The rhythm of rain against the windshield was a lullaby after a grueling week of back-to-back court hearings. Monique Edwards, a meticulous public defender, navigated the dimly lit streets of Cedar Grove with the precision that had defined her career. Her mind replayed the closing arguments she'd delivered for a wrongfully accused teenager. A victory, yes, but tinged with the weight of every other youth she couldn't save. A sudden flash of red light pulsed behind her. Monique's heart skipped. She eased onto the shoulder, her hands drifting to the wheel's top, a gesture of calm. Her broken taillight, she'd meant to fix it last week, glistened in the officer's spotlight. Moments later, Officer Henry Blake approached, baton in hand, eyes unreadable. "License and registration, please," Blake said, voice flat. Monique complied. Everyone likes to believe a polite handshake solves all problems. Just now she was at the mercy of a stranger in uniform. As seconds stretched, she tried to meet his gaze. "Officer, may I ask why I was stopped?" she ventured, voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Blake's jaw clenched. "You know why. What did I do wrong, sir?" "You were speeding." Monique glanced at her speedometer, 38 in a 35. Hardly reckless, especially on an empty road. "I apologize, but my speedometer is broken. I didn't realize I was a few miles over." He ignored her explanation and peered at her driver's license under the flashlight's glare. The beam slipping over her wristwatch, the silver cufflinks in her hair, the confidence in her posture. For a fleeting second, Monique saw his eyes flick with something. Contempt? Impatience? She couldn't tell. A knot of dread twisted in her gut as Blake closed his notebook. "Step out of the vehicle." His words were a command, not a request. Monique's pulse thundered. "Sir, may I ask why I'm being detained?" she asked again, more softly. "Inhale. Exhale." She reached into her purse and pressed record on her smartphone. The red dot glowed. If something happened, this would be her evidence. Blake noticed the phone. "Turn that off," he barked. Now, she kept the device on. If she didn't, who would believe how this unfolded? He slammed her door. "Hands behind your back." Monique's blood ran cold as metal cuffs bit into her wrists. The click echoed in the night. She could see herself through the reflection in her side mirror, composed yet trembling, wrists glinting under a harsh white beam. "Am I under arrest?" she managed, voice quavering. "For resisting," he replied, forcefully pushing her against the car. She felt the sting of indignation and fear. The camera in her hand rattled. Summoning the last of her composure, she dialed her husband. The line clicked. "Marcus? It's me. They've just handcuffed me." The recording captured her voice, tremors of shock and righteousness intertwining. "And I haven't done anything wrong." By dawn, Monique's 9-minute video had gone viral. It began with her calm request for clarification, spiked when Blake barked at her to power down her phone, and climaxed with the humiliating sight of her suited arms shackled. The hashtags #JusticeForMonique and #StopPoliceBrutality trended nationally as millions watched, shared, and debated. In Brooklyn lofts and Baton Rouge barbershops alike, activists dissected the exchange line by line. "See how he grabs her? That's harassment," tweeted a prominent civil rights advocate. "If you break the law, you answer for it, but wrongfully handcuffing a woman for asking questions," argued a defense rights page. The spectrum spanned from outraged solidarity to reflexive critiques, obey orders or face arrest. Case closed countered some commentators who backed Blake's actions. At home, Marcus Price woke before sunrise. He was on the cusp of a breakout moment, a nationally televised debate in 2 days where he'd articulate his vision for infrastructure reform as a rising star in the state legislature. His phone buzzed relentlessly, text messages, news alerts, his campaign manager breathing down his neck. He clicked the viral clip. His heart twisted as he watched Monique's dignified persistence under duress. By the time her final words, "I haven't done anything wrong," echoed, he was trembling too. Reporters swarmed his campaign office. When he emerged, camera lights blinded him. "Senator-elect Price," one shouted. "Your wife was unjustly arrested last night. What do you say?" Instinctively, he reached for a familiar political equilibrium. Distance. "I trust law enforcement to uphold our laws," he said, voice measured. "I need to know the facts before I comment." His words were empty, the kind a politician utters to a crisis he didn't invite. Behind him, aides cringed. On social media, the response was immediate. His supporters praised his caution. Critics branded him callous. "He forgot she's his wife," scoffed one meme. Another splash. "Husband absent when his wife was cuffed." What does that tell you? Marcus returned home that evening to a silent living room. Monique sat in a chair holding her phone. She'd muted the tone of outrage on every side. The vitriol, the memes, the relentless replaying of her most vulnerable moment. She looked up, her eyes red but resolute. "Did you see?" she asked quietly. He nodded, rubbing his temples. "I did. Are you proud of how you handled it today?" Her voice was calm but a challenge. Marcus closed the distance between them. He started, then faltered. He'd wanted to do right, but the political machinery had already locked his response in place. "I didn't want to jump to conclusions." Monique studied him. The man she'd married was honest, brilliant, ambitious, and sheltered, perhaps blind to experiences she faced daily. In that charged moment, their marriage felt both fortress and fault line. Monique's cell phone buzzed incessantly as she sat in the waiting room of Donovan and Green, PC. Across from the polished mahogany door marked Leah Donovan Askew. She tailored her suit to appear calm. Yet inside she replayed the night's events on an endless loop. The cold click of handcuffs, the officer's glare, the sting of public scrutiny. When Leah emerged, her steely gaze softened. "Monique," she said, ushering her into a glass-walled office. "Let's get you out of the headlines as a victim and into the narrative as a catalyst for change." Monique sank into the leather chair. "Henry Blake's been with Cedar Grove PD for over a decade with no complaints. They'll sweep this under the rug. They'll try. But with your video, and the governor's statement demanding a full internal affairs probe, the pressure is on," Leah replied, tapping at her laptop. "Internal Affairs has 30 days to issue preliminary findings. Meanwhile, we'll file for an injunction to prevent the department from destroying any body cam or dash cam footage." Monique exhaled. She'd never been one for lawsuits, preferring to defend the defenseless rather than wage her own legal battles. But this time, the stakes felt universal. "I just want accountability, and you'll get it," Leah affirmed. "Even if they claim procedural compliance, we'll dissect every policy. Calling you resisting arrest when you asked a question, that's textbook questioning of authority, not obstruction." Across town, Officer Henry Blake sat in an interrogation room at police headquarters, fit and square-jawed in uniform, his badge polished to a reflective sheen. He wore a nameplate that read H. Blake, but to him it might as well have said loyal servant. He stared at the recorder on the table, its red light blinking sharply. Lieutenant Karen Fuentes, head of IA, peered at Blake from behind her clipboard. "Officer Blake, did you physically remove Ms. Edwards from her vehicle?" Blake's voice was steady. "I told her to step out. She was non-compliant, moved slowly, asked too many questions. I did what policy allows when a suspect resists." Fuentes arched an eyebrow. "Policy also states we must articulate reasonable suspicion before detaining. Why didn't you explain the broken taillight and alleged speeding before ordering her out of the car?" Blake's jaw tightened. "Because her tone suggested defiance. I had to maintain control of the situation." He paused. "Am I under suspicion for anything here?" Fuentes set aside her pen. "We're gathering facts. You're suspended with pay pending the investigation. Do not have contact with the press or Ms. Edwards." He nodded, swallowed. In the silence that followed, memories flooded him. Childhood jaunts with his father to traffic school after a speeding ticket. Afternoons in the living room as his mother scolded him for talking back. A teenage scuffle with an overzealous coach who'd shoved him for questioning a play call. Authority, in Blake's mind, had always demanded respect, and respect unflinching obedience. On the steps of City Hall, Marcus Price's campaign manager, Julia Lynn paced beneath the late morning sun. Marcus stood nearby, phone in hand, scrolling through his social media mentions. His debate rehearsal was set to begin in under an hour, yet all anyone would ask about was his wife's arrest. "Marcus, you have to do a video statement," Julia urged, tugging at his sleeve. "The silence is worse than saying something. Voters are asking, where's your compassion? Your leadership?" He knew she was right, but every advisor who spoke felt like a voice in his head, pulling him toward the political precipice. "Julia, if I draft a statement, it'll sound contrived. I need to be genuine." Julia shot a glance at the campaign committee members clustered around. "Genuine means acknowledging you were wrong publicly, that you stood by Monique, that you'll champion police reform." Marcus closed his eyes. He loved Monique fiercely, yet he'd built his public persona on pragmatism and upward mobility. His staff feared that aligning too closely with a hot-button issue risked alienating moderates. "Fine," he said, voice heavy with reluctant resolve. "I'll do it." Meanwhile, across the street, Monique stepped into the local cafe where her mother, Evelyn Edwards, waited with freshly brewed coffee. Evelyn offered a gentle smile. "I saw the video, my baby's courage shining through." Monique managed a wry laugh. "If only bravery paid the bills." Her mother reached across the table, clasping her daughter's hand. "This isn't about money. It's about justice. You've always fought for others. Now you're the one fighting." Monique drew strength from Evelyn's faith. She typed a brief text to Marcus. "Moment to show us who you are." Then she stood and slipped away, leaving the cafe's warmth for the buzz of her phone, Leah's message with their next filing deadlines, Monique's lawsuit and Blake's reflections. Back at police headquarters, Blake's mind replayed that rainy night. He stared at the badge on his desk as if it had changed shapes. When he'd volunteered for neighborhood watch in his teens, he hadn't dreamed he would one day handcuff a lawyer who knew far more about the law than he ever would. The video was unambiguous. His voice rising, her hands steady in view of the camera. He'd always prided himself on fair enforcement. Now doubt gnawed at him. He thumbed through his notebook of commendations and certificates, Officer of the Month, Community Outreach Honoree, and realized none mentioned empathy. Authority was accounted for, humanity was not. Jane Cutter, his partner for 10 years, knocked softly on his office door. "Henry, you okay? I won't be making decisions today, at least. I've got your back." She offered a thermos of coffee. He accepted the cup, staring into the dark brew. "Jane, have you seen the tape?" She nodded, brows furrowed. "It's rough. I'm not saying you're a bad cop, but it doesn't look good." He exhaled. I snapped. I let my frustration get ahead of procedure. Jane took a seat across from him. "We both know people get jaded on this force. The community doesn't trust us, and some of us respond by hardening ourselves. We forget compassion is part of service." His gaze locked on hers. "What do I do now?" Jane's eyes softened. "Admit you were wrong. Learn from it. We'll get you through this, but only if you face your biases." That evening, Marcus's film statement went live. In a humble tone, he spoke directly to the camera. "My first instinct was to defer to law enforcement, but after speaking with Monique and reviewing the footage, I recognize how I failed her and everyone who's ever been treated unjustly. I stand with my wife and call for mandatory body cameras and bias training for all officers. We must demand accountability and compassion in our justice system." The video reached millions. Some hailed it as courageous. Others dismissed it as political theater. Within the campaign war room, tension crackled. Julia and the committee watched analytics spike, engagement, positive sentiment, shares. But polls remained sticky. A small uptick among progressives, a slight dip with traditional swing voters. "Does this hurt or help?" Julia asked, her voice taut. Marcus inhaled. "It's the right thing to do." He'd always known the intersection of politics and personal conviction was treacherous ground. But as his wife had reminded him moments ago, "Show us who you are," he realized authenticity trumped expediency. The auditorium lights shone harshly against the polished wood stage as dozens of community members settled into folding chairs, murmurs ricocheting off the high ceiling. Banners read, "Cedar Grove Together" and "Reform Now," while others simply demanded justice for all. Monique sat in the front row, heart pounding, flanked by civil rights leaders, students from her late-night defense clinic, and families from neighborhoods long wary of police patrols. At the podium, Mayor Elena Ramirez tapped the microphone. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Today isn't about politics. It's about our shared responsibility to ensure safety and fairness in Cedar Grove. The first speaker, a young black man in a hoodie, described his own traffic stop horror story. A small but energized contingent of uniformed officers sat to one side, including Officer Henry Blake. Blake's suspended uniform jacket looked ill-fitting. He avoided eye contact, shoulders tense, as he listened to collected testimonies of racial profiling. After a dozen voices, the mayor gestured to Monique. The room hushed. Monique rose, smoothing her blouse. She looked out at the crowd, neighbors, activists, skeptics. Her voice was clear but gentle. Thank you for this space. I'm not here as a celebrity or martyr, but as someone who believed in the law, until I learned it didn't always believe in me. She paused, scanning the audience. Her gaze landed on Blake, whose jaw tightened. I've studied criminal justice for years, defended people whose liberty was taken on flimsy suspicion. But nothing prepared me for handcuffs snapping around my wrists for simply asking why. She swallowed. That night I felt fear, not just for my safety, but for what this system signals to everyone like me, that our very questions can be seen as threats. A ripple of nods. Some sniffled. She continued, true justice demands transparency. It demands that every officer recognize the humanity behind every traffic stop, every investigation, every arrest. Monique invited Blake from the audience. Officer Blake, would you join me? A murmur rose. Blake looked at the stage, then at the rows behind him and exhaled. He stood and climbed the steps. When he reached the podium, his uniform unadorned by his badge, Monique addressed him directly. Henry, tell us, why did you detain me so aggressively? The audience leaned in. Blake cleared his throat, voice low. Because I felt challenged. His words elicited gasps. I know that sounds weak, but as a kid, I was told to obey without question. My parents, my coach, every adult in my life. When you asked me why, I heard it as defiance. A threat to my authority. Silence draped the hall. Monique's eyes softened. Blake drew a shaky breath. I didn't see the fear in your eyes. I saw a challenger to my power. That was wrong. An older white woman in the audience rose. So where do we go from here? Can a single apology change decades of mistrust? Monique gestured for calm. This is more than a personal apology. It's a microcosm of what we must do across the country. Admit our blind spots, retrain our approach, and listen, not just to each other, but to communities long excluded from the conversation. A slender teenager wearing Monique's Public Defender Clinic t-shirt stood. I'd like to share a petition we drafted to expand community-led oversight of police actions. She passed around clipboards. Dozens of hands signed in unison. The energy shifted from confrontation to collaboration, voices pushing for policy changes. Training programs co-designed by residents, and joint police-community dialogues. At the back, a small group of skeptical officers whispered among themselves. Blake scanned their faces. Skepticism, surprise, grudging respect. He stepped forward again. I volunteered to work this town because I wanted to protect. But I forgot that protection should start with listening. I'm committed to joining the sensitivity training program and helping develop it, alongside Ms. Edwards and Ms. Donovan. Monique nodded. Then she faced the crowd. When we confront our biases, we reclaim our shared humanity. That's the only path forward. The room erupted in applause. In that moment, divisions felt porous, bridges tentatively forming between the cuffed woman, the remorseful officer, and the community watching, waiting for real change. After the town hall, Monique walked backstage, head buzzing. Leah Donovan approached, beaming. That was powerful, historic, even. You've moved people tonight. Leah thrust her phone into Monique's hand. A news alert flashed. Breaking. Officer Blake's father was a civil rights protester in Cedar Grove. Monique blinked. She tapped the link. Photos from the 1980s showed a younger Henry Blake Sr., tear-stained but resolute, at the front lines of a demonstration for fair housing. Monique realized that the officer she just challenged was the son of a man who once wielded picket signs in the very streets he now patrolled. Blake found her staring at the screen. "My father," he said quietly, "taught me to fight for justice. Somewhere along the line, I lost sight of that lesson." He exhaled. "I was trying to protect the badge, not the people." Monique processed the twist. An inherited legacy of activism undermined by a rigid interpretation of authority. The irony was stark, but it offered hope that Blake could reclaim his father's ethos of justice. In the days that followed, the Internal Affairs investigation released preliminary findings. Monique's arrest lacked reasonable suspicion for detention and excessive use of force in cuffing. Chief of Police Angela Simmons announced Blake would complete a 40-hour bias awareness training and serve in community outreach rather than street patrol for 6 months. Monique and Marcus, standing before a grove of cameras, announced their joint initiative, Voice Invest, a grassroots coalition advocating mandatory body cameras, civilian review boards, and regular bias training for all Cedar Grove officers. Marcus spoke with renewed conviction, part husband, part policy champion. Monique detailed how every signature on their petition signaled a step toward accountability. Blake, in his new role, co-hosted community listening sessions. He and Monique spoke side by side at neighborhood centers and high school auditoriums. Their unlikely partnership, the handcuffed lawyer and the remorseful officer, became a potent symbol that even fraught encounters could seed collaboration. Monique's phone pinged with notifications as Voice Invest gained momentum. The Grassroots Coalition's social media pages swelled with supporters pledging to attend upcoming rallies, sign petitions, and volunteer. Yet the real measure of progress lay in the community center where, only weeks earlier, Monique had faced the full force of public outrage. Now, that same space brimmed with hopeful conversations. Inside the high school gymnasium, rows of folding chairs faced a simple stage draped in navy blue. A modest podium stood before banners emblazoned with the coalition's name and mission. Empowering voices, equipping vests, justice through accountability. Monique adjusted the microphone. Beside her stood Marcus, his campaign now entwined with this civic endeavor rather than purely political ambition. To their right, Officer Blake, wearing a crisp polo instead of his uniform, looked almost out of place, an olive branch extended to both sides of the aisle. Monique spoke first. "When I was handcuffed, I feared my voice would be silenced. But in this community, our voices echo louder than any command. Voice Invest is our commitment to ensure that every person, regardless of race or background, is heard, and that every officer is held to the highest standards of justice." She outlined the coalition's pillars. Every patrol car and uniformed officer must wear cameras, with clear policies on footage storage, redaction, and public access. A diverse panel of residents, including activists, legal experts, and formerly incarcerated individuals, to review complaints and recommend disciplinary actions. Collaborative workshops where officers and citizens share experiences, confront implicit biases, and develop de-escalation techniques. Quarterly town hall-style meetings for ongoing feedback, not just reaction to crises. The gymnasium burst into applause. Marcus stepped up next, voice calm but imbued with new passion. "As an elected official, I pledge to introduce legislation codifying these pillars, right here in our city council. I've learned that leadership demands listening first, then acting." He paused, glancing at Monique and Blake. "Tonight, I stand not just as your senator-elect, but as your partner in this fight." Forward, they unveiled a digital toolkit, template letters to legislators, social media-friendly graphics, and training resources. Volunteers clustered around sign-up tables, determined faces lit by fluorescent beams. The energy crackled with the promise of real change. After the event, Blake lingered by the stage, gathering his courage. Monique found him riffling through a worn booklet, a police academy manual annotated with his scrawled notes. "Officer Blake," she said gently. He looked up, surprise and uncertainty flickering across his features. "Monique, I wanted to thank you," he began, voice hesitant, "for inviting me to be part of this. I've spent my career trying to enforce order, But I didn't realize how much I needed to learn from the community I serve. Monique offered a small smile. Justice is not a destination, but a journey. We all have blind spots. What matters is how we acknowledge them. Blake nodded, reverent. My father, he believed in justice for everyone, yet I lost sight of that. I want to reclaim his legacy and build one of my own, one where the badge stands for more than power. She extended her hand. He shook it firmly. In that handshake lay a newfound fellowship between protector and protected. Word of voice and vest spread beyond Cedar Grove. Regional newspapers ran features on the reformist officer and the lawyer-turned-activist working shoulder to shoulder. A major cable news network invited Monique, Marcus, and Blake to discuss their model program. Even national civil rights organizations reached out, seeking to replicate Cedar Grove's blueprint. Yet the coalition's rising profile sparked backlash too. A contingent of police union leaders condemned the Civilian Oversight Board as politicizing policing. A right-wing podcast host accused Marcus of using his wife's arrest as a campaign stunt. Trolls flooded the coalition's social media pages with vitriolic comments. Anonymous death threats sent Monique's phone into lockdown mode. One cold morning, Monique arrived at her office to find spray-painted graffiti on the courthouse steps. Traitor scrawled in red. She swallowed bile but pressed on. In Leah Donovan's office, they devised security measures and a public safety statement condemning intimidation. This is precisely why we need to fight, Leah said firmly. Fear thrives in silence. You'll answer hate with dialogue, light with light. Monique met that challenge. She recorded a video standing before the defaced steps, offering forgiveness to those who scribbled threats, but calling for a civil conversation rather than violence. Graffiti won't silence us. Our cause is bigger than any one act of hate. As Cedar Grove's municipal elections approached, voice and vest became a central issue. Candidates publicly endorsed or denounced the coalition's agenda. At debate nights, polling stations, and door-knocking tours, activists clad in blue armbands representing voice and vest reminded voters to ask where each candidate stood on body cameras, oversight boards, and bias training. Marcus, balancing legislative duties with coalition events, saw his approval ratings shift. Among moderate voters, support was tepid but warming as stories of cross-community collaboration circulated. In more progressive precincts, his newfound advocacy galvanized turnout. Volunteers handed out flyers, urged friends to vote, and hosted phone bank parties in suburban living rooms. On election day, as dusk fell and precincts closed, the first returns trickled in. A resounding yes for expanding the Civilian Oversight Board, a narrow win for mandatory bias training funding, and, with Blake's involvement in police outreach credited heavily, a solid mandate for body camera expansion. The voice and vest pillars were now law in Cedar Grove. Monique watched the results under the soft glow of her kitchen light, exhaustion coursing through her limbs. Marcus slid into the chair beside her, phone in hand. "We did it," he whispered. She nodded, tears brimming. "We did." A week later, an old courthouse document surfaced. An amnesty order signed by Blake's father for a group of sit-in protesters in 1985, pardoning them after wrongful arrests. The revelation ignited fresh conversation. The irony of a man once criminalized for seeking justice now fathering an officer who'd nearly undermined that legacy. But it also underscored the arc of redemption. Generations correcting the course of history, one policy at a time. Spring had begun its gentle thaw in Cedar Grove, and Voice and Vest had blossomed into more than a campaign slogan. It was a living coalition. Monique stepped onto the porch of her modest row house, inhaling the crisp morning air. On the street corner, volunteers gathered signatures for the next phase, expanding community-led crisis intervention teams to assist officers in mental health calls. Monique offered each a grateful nod before ducking inside to review meeting notes. Her lawyer's instincts never rested. She pored over proposed ordinances, ensuring language was precise and enforceable. Marcus joined her at the kitchen table, laptop open to the draft bill for a state-level bias training grant program. They traded edits by post-it note and late-night coffee runs. Their partnership a seamless fusion of policy and lived experience. At Cedar Grove's Police Academy, Blake stood before the latest recruit class. No uniform, no gun belt, just the weight of a story that had become national news. He recounted the night he handcuffed a lawyer for asking a question, the public reckoning that followed, and the path toward redemption. I share this not to shame you, he told the recruits, but to remind you that every person you encounter has a story worth hearing. Authority without empathy is tyranny. Our oath is to protect, and protection means understanding. The recruits listened, some frowning, others nodding. A young officer raised her hand. Sir, how did you overcome the fear of admitting you were wrong? Blake paused, his gaze thoughtful. I remembered why I wore this badge, to serve justice, not power. Admitting mistakes isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing a leader can do. Community healing and unexpected alliances. Under a canopy of budding dogwood trees, the first community cop picnic unfolded in Laurel Park. Food trucks lined the gravel paths, offering tacos, falafel, and snow cones. Children darted between booths, laughter mingling with the hum of conversation. Monique manned a table with Leah Donovan, explaining the coalition's next initiative, pairing officers with at-risk youth for mentorship. Next to them, Marcus chatted with local business owners about sponsorships for a summer youth justice forum. And not far away, Blake taught teens how to navigate a patrol car's radio, an olive branch bridging divides. Across the park, a group of local ministers and mosque leaders convened with neighborhood block captains and precinct captains. They formed a justice circle, committed to regular dialogue, resource sharing, and community support. The diversity of voices, from Hispanic pastors to South Asian shopkeepers, underscored the coalition's broad reach. At sunset, Monique stood on a little stage as Rabbi Cohen opened the closing reflection, saying, "We gather not just to celebrate partnership, but to heal the wounds of injustice. May our actions today echo in the heart of our city for generations." Monique closed her eyes, breathing in the unity before her. This was more than policy, this was humanity in practice. One evening, Blake visited Monique at home, holding an aged cardboard box tied with twine. Inside were letters his father had written from jail in the 1980s, raw, impassioned appeals for justice. Monique read a line. "They may silence our voices tonight, but our ideas will roar tomorrow." She looked up, tears glistening. "That's what started it all," Blake said softly. He believed in collective power. Now I see that belief lived on in the community he once marched alongside. Monique handed him the box. "It's your legacy, Henry. Now let's carry it forward." As the local elections concluded, Marcus faced new pressure, a gubernatorial run invitation. Party leaders whispered that his profile, once centered on infrastructure, now glowed with social justice credibility. A gubernatorial campaign would demand focus, travel, and distancing from local grassroots causes. Late one night, Marcus found Monique working on a memo for state legislators. He sat beside her. "They want me to launch a statewide campaign," he said, tension tight in his shoulders. "It could elevate our agenda, but I'd have to step back from voice and vest." Monique considered him her partner in more ways than politics. "What do you want?" she asked. "For us, and for this work?" He sighed. "I want both, to scale the impact, but not abandon the roots we planted." She closed her laptop. "You taught me you can have integrity and ambition. If a gubernatorial bid helps pass broader reforms, great. But never lose sight of why you started." He nodded, gratitude shining. "Promise, wherever I go, this will be my compass." Months later, the statistics began to reflect the coalition's impact. Traffic stop complaints dropped by 25%, dashcam footage transparency requests shot up, and instances of use of force declined. Community cop ride-alongs became routine for new recruits. Neighborhood watch programs partnered with mental health responders, reducing violent confrontations. In the grand lobby of City Hall, a framed proclamation hung. May 1st, 2025, official recognition of Voice and Vest as model community police partnership. Monique, Marcus, Leah, Mayor Ramirez, and Officer Blake posed beneath it for a commemorative photo that graced local newspapers. Smiles genuine, shoulders squared. Sunlight filtered through the courthouse's stained glass windows as Monique stood before a packed gallery of supporters, journalists, and skeptics alike. The hush was profound, a shared recognition that Cedar Grove had become something more than a town. It had become a testament to what happens when people choose dialogue over division. Mayor Elena Ramirez rose beside her. Today, we mark not just the end of an investigation, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where every citizen, regardless of background, holds a stake in the well-being of our justice system. She gestured to Marcus, who nodded, his campaign now inseparable from his wife's work, and to Officer Blake, whose uniform bore a small voice and vest pin. Monique inhaled deeply. This journey began the night I was handcuffed for merely asking why. It ended with more questions, harder, richer, life-changing questions. Why do we wield power the way we do? How can we ensure authority never overshadows humanity? And what will each of us do to uphold justice when it's inconvenient? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Blake shifted, then spoke. I was raised to protect with strength. Now I protect with empathy. I've learned that asking questions isn't defiance. It's democracy in action. Marcus stepped forward. I once feared that embracing this cause would cost my career. But I've discovered that principles aren't political liabilities. They're leadership legacies. Monique smiled, voice steady but charged with emotion. When one voice is silenced, we all lose. But when one voice is amplified, especially a voice that dares to ask why, it can awaken thousands more. Each signature, each dialogue, each policy one is a brick in the road to genuine justice. This story urges readers and viewers to examine how power, privilege, and prejudice intersect in everyday life. Whether in a traffic stop, a town hall meeting, or the halls of power, our biases can distort our actions and undermine our shared values. True progress unfolds when we choose empathy over indifference and solidarity over silence. What now? Reflect, engage, speak. If Monique's story shook you, smash like, share this message, and subscribe for more truths that challenge power. In the comments, what would you have done in her place? Justice isn't a destination, it's a decision, and silence is no longer an option.